Don't play dumb. You people always sit wrong. The words land before the aisle clears, before the overhead bins close, before anyone can pretend this is a misunderstanding. The senior flight attendant plants herself sideways in the jet bridge, blocking the path with a practiced smirk. Chin lifted, eyes cold, voice sharp enough to cut dignity in half. The elderly black couple stop. Isaiah Carter, 72, stands tall but thin, dark brown skin weathered by decades of work as a city postal supervisor. His hands, steady, gentle, rest on the handle of a small carry-on. Beside him, Ruth Carter, 69, warm brown skin, silver hair neatly wrapped, retired elementary school teacher, church volunteer, grandmother of 5, clutches her boarding pass with both hands as if paper might steady the moment. They are first class. They know it. Their tickets say it. The screen behind the attendant confirms it. Yet the attendant laughs, low, contemptuous. First class? She rolls the word like it tastes bad. That's cute. A few passengers slow. Someone pretends to text. Someone else records without raising the phone. Ruth clears her throat. Ma'am, our seats are... Oh, I know what you think your seats are, the attendant interrupts, dripping sarcasm. But let's be honest. People like you always think you're entitled to something you didn't earn. Isaiah blinks. Once. He doesn't raise his voice. We're just boarding where we were assigned. The attendant leans closer, invading space, lowering her voice just enough to feel like a secret. Assigned? She snorts. Sweetheart, assignments get corrected all the time, especially when the system catches errors. Her eyes flick to Ruth's shoes. Sensible. Clean. Not expensive. She smiles like she solved a puzzle. Do you have any idea how many people try this? She says, louder now. Walking into first class like it's a charity line, hoping no one notices. Isaiah stiffens. We paid for... With what? She cuts in. Coupons? Points? Someone else's card? A murmur ripples down the jet bridge. The captain hasn't arrived yet. The purser is busy at the door. Power fills the gap. Ruth's voice trembles, not with fear but restraint. Please don't speak to us that way. The attendant's smile vanishes. Oh, now I'm the problem? She gestures broadly, theatrical. Everyone look. I try to help, and suddenly I'm speaking the wrong way. Classic. She taps her tablet, hard. Here's what's going to happen. You'll step aside, I'll fix your seats, and you'll be grateful we don't delay boarding with whatever this is. Isaiah exhales slowly. He has learned this breath over a lifetime. Count to 4. Don't give them your anger. Ruth reaches for his sleeve. The attendant notices and laughs again. Aw, holding hands, that's adorable. Her eyes narrow. You know what else is adorable? People who think politeness upgrades them. She turns, already typing. Let me move you where you'll be more comfortable. They wait. Then the printer chirps. 2 new boarding passes slide out. Ruth looks down and her stomach drops. Row 36, seat E row 38, seat B. Not together, not close, not first class. The attendant tears the originals in half with a snap loud enough to echo. There, problem solved. Isaiah's voice is barely above a whisper. We were separated. Yeah, the attendant shrugs. Happens. Planes are full. Life's unfair. She leans in again, eyes glittering. You should be used to that by now. Ruth gasps, quiet, involuntary. A younger flight attendant nearby smirks. Another looks away. No one stops it. Isaiah straightens his shoulders. We will speak to a supervisor. The attendant's face hardens into contempt. You are speaking to one. She steps aside, finally clearing the path, like granting mercy. Move along, and don't make this harder than it needs to be. They walk. Every step down the aisle feels like a judgment. Eyes follow them. Whispers trail them. A man in first class shakes his head as if annoyed by the delay. A woman clutches her purse tighter when Isaiah passes. Ruth pauses once, just once, turning back toward the front, toward the seats that were supposed to be theirs. The attendant catches her look, smiles thinly, mouths two words. Wrong place. Ruth turns away. They disappear into the back of the aircraft, separated, diminished, humiliated, but not broken. Above the hum of boarding, Isaiah whispers the only thing that steadies him. A verse he learned long before Power learned his name. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Ruth squeezes her boarding pass until the ink creases. Somewhere beyond this plane, their son is traveling too, unaware that dignity has just been stolen in pieces. But the theft has a timestamp, and every system leaves a trail. If you have ever been judged by how you look, spoken down to because someone thought you didn't belong, then what happens next to this elderly couple will make your heart race and your blood boil. Don't forget to like and subscribe and stay with Dignity Voices to follow this story of quiet power, justice, and grace. What the crew does to them once the doors close is far worse than words. The moment the aircraft doors sealed shut, the rules changed. Not the written ones, the unspoken ones. Ruth Carter sat rigid in row 36E, boxed in by a fully reclined seat and a man who spread himself like she wasn't there. The lavatory door behind her hissed open and closed, every sound sharp, every smell unavoidable. The seatbelt cut into her waist. She adjusted it once, then stopped, afraid any movement might draw attention. Isaiah sat 2 rows back in 38B aisle seat, knees twisted sideways to make room for bodies that brushed past him without apology. Each bump landed with intention, not force, but message. You don't belong. He leaned forward, trying to see Ruth. Their eyes met briefly. Then a flight attendant stepped directly into the line of sight, blocking it. Heather Vale, senior flight attendant, moved like she owned the aisle. Her heels clicked with authority. She paused at the divider between first class and economy, turned deliberately, and scanned the cabin until her gaze locked onto Ruth. Heather smiled. It was the same smile from the jet bridge, the one that said, "I won." She whispered something to the junior attendant beside her, Mason Trent, 31, and he snorted, shaking his head like he'd just heard a joke worth sharing. Mason grabbed an empty service cart, far too early for service, and pushed it down the aisle with unnecessary force. He stopped directly beside Ruth's row, angling the cart so it blocked the narrow passage. Ruth raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me, sir." "Don't," Mason snapped. Her hand froze midair. He looked at it like it offended him. "You don't need to flag us down like that." Ruth swallowed. "I just wanted to ask if my husband and I could..." "Could what?" Mason cut in loudly. "Move again?" A few heads turned. A phone tilted. Mason smiled thinly. "Ma'am, first class is up there. This is economy. You were seated correctly." Ruth's voice stayed calm. "We were reassigned without explanation. We didn't agree to be separated." Mason laughed. "Agree?" He glanced around, inviting silent approval. "This isn't a negotiation. Seats get corrected. Mistakes happen." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sting. "Honestly, you should be grateful you weren't put on standby." Ruth's fingers curled around the armrest. From behind, Isaiah began to rise. "Sir?" Heather's voice cut in immediately, sharp, commanding. "Remain seated." Isaiah paused. "My wife is being..." Heather stepped closer, tablet held like a shield. "Your wife is fine." Her eyes flicked to Ruth, cold, assessing. "She's exactly where she's supposed to be." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "We paid for first class." Heather sighed theatrically, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Here we go." She leaned down, invading Isaiah's space. There was a system error. It was fixed. This discussion is over. "By separating us?" Isaiah asked quietly. Heather's lips curled. "Sir, listen carefully. This aircraft is full of people who understand how travel works. Don't embarrass yourselves by pretending this is discrimination." Then she added, soft, lethal, "People like you always think manners earn upgrades." Isaiah stared straight ahead, fists clenched, forcing his body to stillness. Heather watched him, almost disappointed he didn't explode. Mason tapped Ruth's tray table with 2 fingers. "Leave seatbelt on during taxi." Ruth looked up. "It is." Mason smiled. "Then stop touching it." He nudged the cart forward, just enough to clip Ruth's knee. A sharp jolt of pain shot up her leg. She gasped before she could stop herself. Mason didn't apologize. Heather didn't look back. As the plane began to taxi, the captain's voice came over the intercom, steady, reassuring, oblivious. But the cruelty didn't pause. Heather stopped at the forward galley where Gina Hargrove, 46, the gate supervisor, had boarded briefly for paperwork. Crisp blazer, airport authority badge, a woman used to deciding who mattered. Heather handed her a small printout. "They were confused," Heather murmured. Gina glanced at the paper, then toward the back of economy. Her mouth twisted. "So, you moved them?" "Of course," Gina smirked. "Good. First class doesn't need that kind of energy?" Heather chuckled. "They'll behave. They always do, once they realize arguing won't help." A nearby passenger stiffened, heard enough to know it wasn't about seats. Gina stepped off before the doors locked, leaving Heather fully in charge. Back in economy, Ruth pressed her lips together, blinking hard. She searched for Isaiah again, panic threatening to crack her composure. Isaiah lifted 2 fingers to his chest. "I'm steady. I'm here." Ruth nodded once. From the front cabin, glassware clinked. Laughter drifted back. Heather's voice rang out brightly, weaponized cheer. "First class, we'll begin pre-departure beverages shortly." The seatbelt sign stayed on, and in the worst seats on the plane, split apart by design, the Carters sat silently as the aircraft accelerated, carrying them forward while dignity was left somewhere behind on the runway. Cruelty is easier at altitude. Once the wheels left the ground and the seatbelt sign flickered off, the crew stopped pretending this was about policy. The smiles sharpened. The choreography began. Ruth felt it first in the way the aisle narrowed around her, how bodies seemed to pass through her space instead of around it. A shoulder brushed her arm. Then another. Each time just light enough to deny intent, just hard enough to bruise dignity. She folded her hands in her lap, knuckles whitening, and stared at the safety card like it held answers. 2 rows back, Isaiah counted breaths. He had learned how to sit still in rooms where stillness was survival. Union meetings, city offices, court benches where men who looked like him were already presumed wrong. He told himself this was temporary. We will land. We will walk away together. But together kept being delayed. The first service cart came through fast, too fast for a crowded aisle. Mason pushed it like a battering ram, metal rattling, wheels squealing. He stopped short beside Isaiah, letting the cart block the aisle. "Feet," Mason said without looking at him. Isaiah pulled his knees in. The cart still clipped his shin. "Careful," Isaiah said quietly. Mason finally looked at him, smiled. "I am." He rolled on. Up ahead, Heather stood near the divider, surveying economy like a foreman checking a work site. Her eyes landed on Ruth. She tilted her head, and gestured. Mason doubled back with a drink tray. He set it down across Ruth's row, trapping her in place. Ruth waited. Then, gently, "Excuse me, sir, may I—" "Not now," Mason snapped. "You see me working. I need to use the restroom." Mason's gaze slid over her, slow and appraising. "You should have gone before." "I tried," Ruth said, heat creeping into her cheeks. The sign was on. He shrugged. "Rules." Heather drifted closer, arms folded. "Is there a problem?" Ruth looked up. "I just need—" Heather cut her off. "You've been moving around a lot." Ruth's mouth fell open. "I've been seated." Heather smiled thinly. "Ma'am, we're responsible for safety. When passengers are restless, it makes everyone uncomfortable." The word restless hung in the air, sticky with meaning. A man across the aisle shifted, uneasy. A woman near the window stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Ruth's voice shook despite her effort. "Please." Heather leaned down, close enough that only Ruth could hear. "Sit still. You don't want attention." She straightened and snapped, "Mason, continue service." The tray lifted, the aisle cleared. Ruth stayed seated, bladder aching, throat burning, humiliation blooming like heat rash. 2 rows back, Isaiah saw it. He stood before he could stop himself. "Ma'am," he said, careful, "my wife needs—" Heather's hand shot out, flat against Isaiah's chest. Not a shove, a stop. Gasps rippled. A phone rose, then dipped. "Sir," Heather said sharply, loud enough for the cabin. "Sit down." Isaiah froze. Her palm stayed there a beat too long. He felt the pressure, the power. "You're not authorized to stand during service," she added, voice honeyed for the audience. "Don't make me call security." Security? At 30,000 feet. Isaiah lowered himself back into his seat. Slowly. Every eye followed him down. Heather removed her hand and smoothed her sleeve like nothing happened. Later, it got worse. Turbulence rattled the cabin. Light, expected. The captain's voice chimed with reassurance. Heather moved fast now, snapping orders, enjoying the authority. Masks secured, belts on, all of them. She stopped beside Ruth's row. Ruth fumbled with her belt. The clasp stuck. Heather leaned in, yanked the strap tight, too tight, pinning Ruth's breath. "There! Now you won't move!" Ruth gasped, pain flaring across her ribs. "Is that necessary?" a man nearby asked, tentative. Heather didn't look at him. "Safety is necessary." The turbulence passed. Heather didn't loosen the belt. When Ruth tried to adjust, it herself, Mason appeared instantly. "Hands down," he said. "You don't follow instructions very well." Ruth's eyes filled. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs and stared at the seat back, blinking away tears she refused to spill. Isaiah watched helplessly. He pressed his forehead to the cool plastic of the seat in front of him and prayed without words. Then came the accusation. A phone clattered to the floor near Isaiah's feet, slid there from the aisle. Mason turned sharply. "Hey!" he said loud. "That yours?" Isaiah looked down, startled. "No!" Mason crossed his arms. "It came from your side." "It fell," Isaiah said. "From the cart." Heather appeared instantly. "Sir, hand it over." Isaiah bent to pick it up. Mason slapped his wrist away. "Don't touch it." Heads turned. Whispers flared. Heather raised her voice. "Sir, if you're attempting to conceal property, that's a serious matter." Isaiah's heart pounded. "I didn't—" "Enough," Heather said. "Mason, secure it." Mason scooped the phone and stepped back, smirking. People always play innocent. A woman near the aisle spoke up now, voice trembling but firm. "I saw it fall from the cart." Heather fixed her with a stare. "Ma'am, remain in your seat." The woman fell silent. Minutes later, Heather returned the phone to a first-class passenger with an apology that dripped sweetness. No apology came to Isaiah. The message was clear. We can make anything stick. By the time descent began, Ruth's hands were shaking. Isaiah's jaw ached from holding anger in place. They caught each other's eyes across the aisle, too far to touch, close enough to share the truth. They are doing this on purpose. As the plane descended, the cabin lights dimmed. Heather stood at the front, arms crossed, satisfied. The humiliation had been public. The danger had been quiet. The record, if anyone bothered to check, would read uneventful flight. Ruth closed her eyes and whispered a verse she learned as a child, a rope thrown into dark water. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." Matthew 5:6. The wheels hit the runway. Applause broke out, thin, relieved. Heather smiled. She believed the story would end here. She was wrong. If you have ever been humiliated in public, endangered in silence, or told to sit still while someone else decided your worth, what happens after this plane lands will change everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices as justice begins to move. Quietly, decisively. Because the worst cruelty doesn't happen in the air. It happens when they think no one powerful is watching. The plane landed without ceremony. No applause this time, just the dull thud of wheels and the restless scrape of relief as passengers surged upright, grabbing bags, reclaiming space, eager to leave everything behind. Ruth stayed seated. Her ribs still ached where the belt had been yanked too tight. Her knee throbbed where the cart had struck. She waited until the aisle cleared enough to stand without being shoved. 2 rows back, Isaiah watched her carefully. He lifted a hand. 2 fingers pressed briefly to his chest, the signal they'd shared for years. "I'm here. Stay steady." Ruth nodded once. Up front, Heather Vale stood near the galley, arms folded, posture satisfied. She scanned the economy cabin like an inspector checking that order had been restored. The chaos of boarding was gone. The power felt secure again. Beside her, Mason blocked the aisle intermittently, barking directions with selective politeness, sharp for some, warm for others. "Single file," he snapped at Isaiah when he rose. Isaiah didn't argue. He waited. When Mason moved, Isaiah stepped forward slowly, keeping Ruth in sight. Ruth reached up for her carry-on. Her fingers touched nothing. She froze. "Isaiah," she whispered. "My bag." He leaned forward. "What?" "It was above my seat," Ruth said, heart pounding. "It's gone." Heather turned instantly, drawn by the word gone like blood in water. "Is there a problem?" Ruth swallowed. "My carry-on is missing." Heather smiled, all patience. "Maybe you put it somewhere else." "I didn't," Ruth said. "I watched myself place it there." Heather's eyes flicked over Ruth's face, her clothes, her hands, assessing credibility. "People misremember things when they're stressed." Ruth's voice tightened. "I'm not confused." Heather's smile thinned. "Mason, help this passenger look for her bag." Mason swung open the overhead bins above Ruth's row with exaggerated force. Empty. He glanced down at Ruth like she'd failed a test. "Not here," he announced loudly. Ruth's chest tightened. "It was here." Mason shrugged. "Then someone must have moved it." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sting. "Or maybe it was never yours." Isaiah stepped into the aisle. "That's enough." Heather snapped. "Sir?" Isaiah didn't raise his voice. "We are retrieving her bag." Heather stepped closer, her tone sharpening. "You're holding up deplaning." Isaiah met her eyes, calm. "So are you." For a moment, neither moved. A nearby passenger cleared her throat. "I saw her put the bag up there," the woman said quietly. Heather turned on her. "Unless you work for this airline, remain seated." The woman fell silent. Heather looked back at Ruth. "You'll need to file a report at baggage services." Ruth shook her head. "We didn't check it." Heather shrugged. "Then it's unfortunate." That word, unfortunate, landed harder than the cart ever had. Ruth closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out the reissued boarding passes, creased, handled too. Many times. She smoothed them carefully, as if calming herself through the motion. Isaiah leaned closer. Ruth whispered, "Look." At the bottom of the pass, barely noticeable. Reissued, 1842 Agent ID, GH204. Isaiah read it once, then again. Something in his face changed. Not anger, not relief, but clarity. The fog lifted. This wasn't chaos, it was deliberate, and deliberation left trails. Heather noticed the shift. "What are you staring at?" she asked sharply. "Our passes," Isaiah replied. "Hand them to me," Heather said. Isaiah didn't move. "They're ours." Heather's smile faltered, just a fraction. "You're holding up the aisle." Isaiah turned slightly, addressing the nearby rows without raising his voice. If anyone witnessed our seats being changed at the gate, or heard staff say first class was corrected, we'd appreciate your name. The cabin went still. People avoided eye contact, pretended to adjust bags. Silence thickened. Then someone stood. A young woman, Elena Park, late 20s, rose from her seat, phone in hand. Her voice shook, but she didn't sit back down. I saw it, she said, and I recorded some of what happened on board. Heather's head snapped toward her. Ma'am, filming? We've landed, Elena replied. And you put your hand on him earlier. You tightened her seatbelt. You accused him of taking a phone that fell from your cart. Murmurs rippled. Mason stepped forward. You can't make accusations. A man near the aisle spoke quietly, surprising himself. I saw the phone fall. Another voice followed. And the cart hit her knee. Heather's breath caught, not because she'd lost control, because control no longer mattered. Witnesses had entered the equation. Heather forced a laugh. This is ridiculous. We're not doing a trial in economy. Isaiah met her gaze. No, he said calmly. We're making a record. Heather's eyes narrowed. Of what? Isaiah gestured gently toward the passengers. Of what happened? For the first time, Heather looked uncertain. Phones were visible now, not raised high, just present. Heather swallowed, then snapped, Mason, move! Mason hesitated, then stepped aside. Ruth and Isaiah moved into the aisle together, finally side by side. Ruth's shoulder brushed Isaiah's arm, a simple contact, a restoration. As they passed, Heather leaned in and muttered, bitter and low, People like you always think you're special. Ruth stopped. She didn't turn fully, didn't argue. She looked back just enough for Heather to see her eyes, steady, tired, unbreakable. We don't think we're special, Ruth said softly. We think we're human. Then she faced forward again and walked off the plane with Isaiah beside her. Heather stood frozen, staring after them. For the first time since boarding, she understood something had shifted. Not power. Truth. The terminal smelled like coffee, floor polish, and relief. Ruth and Isaiah stepped off the jet bridge together at last, moving slowly, bodies still carrying the echo of the flight. The noise hit them all at once, rolling suitcases, announcements, laughter, the ordinary chaos of arrivals that made what they'd endured feel unreal, like a bad dream that clung to the skin. Ruth paused just beyond the gate. Her knee throbbed. Her ribs ached when she inhaled too deeply. She steadied herself on Isaiah's arm. You all right? He asked. I am, she said. Then, softer. I just need a minute. They stood to the side, out of traffic. Isaiah looked back once toward the aircraft door. Heather Vale hadn't emerged yet. Mason hovered near the gate desk, eyes darting, posture tense. The gate supervisor, Gina Hargrove, was nowhere to be seen. That absence mattered. A black SUV idled outside the glass doors beyond baggage claim, engine humming, driver waiting with practiced stillness. It wasn't flashy. No logos, no security detail pacing, just readiness. Inside the terminal, a man in a charcoal coat stepped through the crowd, moving with purpose but not urgency. Early 40s. Calm face. The kind of presence that didn't announce itself. People simply made space without realizing why. He scanned the gate. Then he saw them. Ruth felt it before she saw him. The way Isaiah's arm stiffened, the way his breath caught. She followed his gaze. Their son stopped 10 feet away. For a split second, his face brightened with the smile he'd practiced for weeks. The surprise hug, the laughter, you should have seen your faces. Then he took them in fully. The back of economy posture, the way Ruth favored her knee, the bruising shadow at her ribs, the boarding passes still clenched in her hand like evidence. The smile vanished. Mom? He said quietly. Dad? Ruth tried to sound normal. There you are, she said, forcing warmth into her voice. You made it. He stepped closer, eyes never leaving her. What happened? Isaiah shook his head once. Not here. The same signal Ruth had used on the jet bridge. Old habits, protective instincts. But the son, Caleb Carter, was already reading the story written in their bodies. "We were moved," Ruth said carefully. "From first class." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Moved? How?" Isaiah held out the reissued boarding passes. Caleb took them, read the seat numbers, the timestamp, the agent ID. He didn't react. He asked one question, his voice level. "Were you separated?" Ruth nodded. Caleb exhaled slowly. Then he asked another, quieter. "Did anyone touch you?" Ruth hesitated. Isaiah answered. "Yes." Caleb closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not in grief, not in rage, but in calculation. When he opened them, his expression was still calm. Too calm. "Sit," he said gently, guiding them to a row of seats near the windows. He crouched in front of them so he could see their faces. "I need you to tell me everything. Slowly." They did. The gate, the torn tickets, the separation, the cart, the belt, the accusation. Caleb listened without interrupting. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look away. Each detail landed, stacking neatly into a structure he recognized. When they finished, he nodded once. "Thank you." Ruth reached for his sleeve. "We don't want trouble." Caleb covered her hand with his. "I know." He stood and stepped aside, pulling out his phone. Not to call customer service. He tapped a contact labeled Aviation Compliance. Direct. "Caleb Carter," he said when the line picked up. "I need gate footage pulled immediately. GH-204. Also cabin crew logs for Flight 782. Lock the records. Yes, now." He hung up and dialed again. "Board liaison," he said. "I'm at the airport. My parents were reassigned from first class to the rear of economy and separated. There are witnesses and recordings. I'll need an incident team on site." A pause. Caleb's voice didn't rise. "I'm aware of the optics. Proceed." He ended the call. Mason watched from the gate desk, color draining from his face as he recognized the name. Heather stepped out of the jet bridge at last, confident stride returning, until she saw Caleb standing there with Ruth and Isaiah. She slowed. Caleb turned, met her eyes. Heather's smile faltered, then reset. "Sir, can I help you?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He walked closer, stopping just inside her personal space. Not threatening, just unavoidable. "Yes," he said softly. "You can explain why my parents were moved from first class, separated, physically handled, and accused of theft." Heather laughed lightly. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Caleb raised a hand, not abrupt, absolute. "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm documenting." Heather's gaze flicked to Ruth, to Isaiah, to the small cluster of passengers lingering nearby, phones visible now, unhidden. "We followed procedure," Heather said, voice tightening. "There was a system error." Caleb held up the boarding pass. "Reissued at 1842 by Agent GH-204. Explain the error." Heather opened her mouth, closed it. Caleb continued, still calm. "Explain the cart striking my mother's knee. The seatbelt tightened without release. The false accusation." Heather's composure cracked. "You don't understand how stressful our job is." "I understand exactly," Caleb said. "I sit on 3 airline boards." The words moved through the terminal like a pressure change. Mason went pale. Heather stared. What?" Caleb didn't raise his voice. "I am the lead investor in this carrier's current expansion round, and today, you created a record." Security arrived. Not rushing, not dramatic. 2 compliance officers followed, badges visible. One approached Caleb with a nod. "Mr. Carter, we're ready." Heather's mouth worked soundlessly. "This is unnecessary." Caleb turned to the officers. "Please escort my parents to medical assessment and take statements. Then place Ms. Vale and Mr. Trent on administrative leave pending investigation." Heather recoiled. "You can't." The officer spoke calmly. "Ma'am, please step aside." Heather looked at Ruth, searching for mercy. Ruth met her gaze, not with anger, with weariness. Caleb turned back to his parents. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have been here sooner." Isaiah shook his head. "You're here now." As they were escorted away, Ruth whispered a verse that steadied her when strength felt borrowed. "He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God?" Micah 6:8. Caleb heard it, nodded once. Justice had begun, not as spectacle, but as process. And process, when guided by truth, does not stop. If you've ever been told to stay quiet so someone else could stay comfortable, watch what happens when the truth meets the system that tried to erase it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices, because the next steps aren't loud. They're irreversible. What the airline does next will expose a pattern far bigger than one flight, and justice will move through policy, not pity. Justice didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with clipboards. Ruth and Isaiah sat in a quiet room off the main terminal. Neutral walls, soft lighting, the kind of space designed to lower blood pressure and liability at the same time. A nurse checked Ruth's knee, measured the bruising at her ribs, asked gentle questions. Isaiah answered when Ruth tired, his voice steady, careful to keep emotion from distorting facts. Across the hall, the machinery began to move. Caleb stood with two compliance officers and a woman in a navy blazer whose badge read Airline Ethics and Risk. Her name was Mary Ann Holt, and she listened the way surgeons listen, focused, precise, already planning the incision. "We've frozen the flight records," she said. "Gate footage, seat maps, crew tablets, internal messages. Nothing gets deleted now." Caleb nodded. "Good." Another officer added, "We've secured passenger statements. At least 4 corroborations on physical contact. 2 on the phone incident. 1 recording of the seatbelt." Mary Ann's pen paused. "The seatbelt?" Caleb answered. "It was tightened by crew during turbulence and not released after." Mary Ann looked up. "That's a safety violation." "It was punitive," Caleb said, "not procedural." Mary Ann didn't argue. She wrote punitive and underlined it. Down the corridor, Heather Vale sat rigid in a chair, arms folded, confidence draining minute by minute. Mason Trent paced near, a vending machine, checking his phone repeatedly as if a signal might save him. A uniformed officer approached Heather. "Ma'am, we'll need your device." Heather scoffed. "On what grounds?" "Administrative leave pending investigation." Heather laughed. Sharp, brittle. "This is ridiculous. I was doing my job." The officer didn't react. He waited. Heather handed over the tablet with a glare. "You'll find nothing." The officer powered it down, placed it in an evidence bag, and labeled it. "Crew device. Vale, H." Mason watched, swallowed, and tried to slip away. "Mr. Trent," Mary Ann called without looking up. "Please remain." He froze. Caleb moved through the terminal with the quiet authority of someone used to rooms changing temperature when he entered. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He let the process speak. At a long table nearby, 2 IT specialists pulled logs onto screens, timestamps, seat changes, annotations. One line glowed brighter than the rest. Seat reassignment, manual override, approved. Approved by whom? They clicked. Supervisor, GH204. Caleb exhaled slowly. Loop and airport operations. Mary Ann nodded. Already done. Within minutes, Gina Hargrove appeared. Gate supervisor, hair immaculate, face pale. She attempted a smile that didn't land. "This seems excessive," Gina said. "We corrected a seating issue." Mary Ann turned her screen. "At 1842, you authorized a manual override moving 2 confirmed first-class passengers to rear economy and separating them." Gina's eyes flicked to Caleb. There was confusion. Mary Ann scrolled. "Your note says, corrected to appropriate cabin. Explain appropriate. Gina's lips parted, closed. Caleb watched her carefully, not with anger, with attention. Marianne continued. Also, we have audio from the jet bridge. A witness captured remarks consistent with bias. Gina bristled. Are you accusing me? I'm documenting, Marianne said evenly. Words matter. Across the hall, Heather raised her voice. This is a witch hunt. Marianne didn't look over. No, this is a pattern review. That word, pattern, settled like a verdict waiting to be read. The captain arrived then, uniform crisp, expression tight. He shook Caleb's hand. I'm sorry this happened. Caleb nodded. I appreciate you logging the incident mid-flight. I did, the captain said. And I'll say this plainly. What I'm hearing doesn't align with our standards. Marianne slid a form across the table. Captain, we'll need your statement. Of course. Phones buzzed quietly. Emails landed. A meeting invitation populated calendars up the chain. Legal, HR, operations. The system didn't argue. It complied. Ruth and Isaiah were escorted back into the main terminal once the nurse cleared them. They moved slowly, leaning into each other, surprised by how heavy the aftermath felt. Surviving was one thing, being believed was another. Caleb met them halfway. They're escalating it, he said gently. Are you okay to stay a bit longer? Ruth nodded. We're not leaving until the truth is finished. Isaiah squeezed her hand. We've waited this long. Marianne approached them with a respectful nod. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, thank you for your patience. I want to be clear. What occurred on that flight violates our policies, multiple policies. Ruth's voice was calm. We don't want apologies that disappear. Marianne met her gaze. You won't get one. She turned to Caleb. We're issuing immediate suspensions for Vale and Trent pending termination review. Supervisor Hargrove is removed from a duty effective now. An external audit will assess prior complaints tied to seat reassignment and passenger treatment. Caleb nodded once. And the passengers? Marianne didn't hesitate. We're notifying everyone on that flight of the investigation and inviting statements. Transparency matters. Heather lunged forward. You can't do this because of them. The room went still. Marianne turned at last. Ms. Vale, you're being disciplined because of you. Security stepped closer. Heather fell silent. Mason's shoulders slumped. He stared at the floor. Gina whispered, This is being blown out of proportion. Marianne tapped her pen. 4 witnesses. 1 recording. Medical documentation. Manual override logs. That's not proportion. That's proof. Caleb glanced at his parents. Ruth was tired, but there was a steadiness in her eyes now, a sense of ground under her feet. Is there anything you want to add? Marianne asked them. Ruth thought for a moment. Yes. She lifted her chin. Training, not just punishment, and a policy that prevents separation like this, especially for elderly passengers. Marianne nodded. We can do that. Isaiah added quietly, and an apology to the passengers who saw this and felt powerless. Silence hurts everyone. Marianne wrote it down. Agreed. The officers escorted Heather, Mason, and Gina away. No cuffs, no shouting, just doors opening, careers closing, consequences walking on their own feet. Caleb watched them go, then turned back to his parents. I'll see this through. Ruth touched his cheek. Do it the right way. I will, he said, the quiet way. Overhead, an announcement chimed. Another flight boarding, another story beginning somewhere else. But here, in this terminal, the system had been forced to look at itself without flinching. Justice didn't need volume. It needed records. And records once written do not forget. The story didn't break with a headline. It leaked. Quietly, relentlessly. Through emails forwarded one time too many. Through internal memos copied and saved. through passengers who went home uneasy and finally decided that silence was heavier than speaking. By morning, the airline's compliance office had a problem it could no longer localize. What began as one flight became 9 complaints. Different dates, different routes, the same names. Heather Vale's personnel file unfolded like a map no one had wanted to read. Strong command presence. Occasional passenger friction. No formal violations sustained. Each note was sanitized, smoothed, softened, language designed to protect the system from itself. Until now. A junior analyst flagged something no one could unsee. Manual seat reassignments disproportionately affecting elderly passengers of color. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. Often late boarding, often system corrections, often separated from companions. A pattern. By noon, the legal department joined the call. By early afternoon, the board demanded answers. Caleb sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the runway, hands folded, listening, not speaking yet. Across from him, executives shuffled papers, voices careful, eyes strained. "This exposure could escalate," one said. "We need to contain," another began. Caleb raised his hand. Not abruptly, not aggressively. The room fell silent anyway. "Containment," he said calmly, "is what created this." No one disagreed. In a different building across the airport, Heather sat alone in a small interview room. Her confidence had curdled into anger, then into something closer to fear. She crossed and uncrossed her legs, eyes darting to the door every time footsteps passed. When the investigator entered, Heather straightened. "I want to make it clear," she said immediately. "I never targeted anyone. People are projecting." The investigator, Ms. Alvarez, neutral voice, neutral face, pressed a button. Audio filled the room. "People like you always think manners earn upgrades." Heather's jaw tightened. Another clip. "Just make sure they stay back there." Heather scoffed. "That's taken out of context." Ms. Alvarez nodded. "Context helps." She slid a document forward. 9 complaints, 4 witnesses, 2 recordings, 1 medical assessment. Heather's eyes scanned the pages, breath quickening. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, "and passengers lie." Ms. Alvarez met her gaze. "Passengers don't share identical details independently by coincidence." Silence stretched. Across the hall, Mason sat hunched, hands clasped, staring at the floor. He'd stopped checking his phone. Messages had stopped coming. When asked about the cart, the belt, the phone accusation, his answers came out thin and inconsistent. "I was just following her lead," he muttered at one point. Ms. Alvarez wrote that down too. Following orders did not erase responsibility. At airport operations, Gina Hargrove packed her desk under supervision. The badge that once swung confidently at her hip lay, sealed in a plastic bag. She avoided eye contact with everyone except one assistant she trusted enough to whisper to. "This is unfair," Gina said. "Everyone does it." The assistant didn't answer, because everyone didn't do it. Only people who believed they could. That afternoon, the airline issued an internal notice. Dry language, carefully chosen words, but the meaning was unmistakable. Immediate termination proceedings initiated for violation of passenger dignity, safety protocol, and discriminatory conduct. Heather Vale's name was listed, so was Mason Trent's, and beneath them, in smaller type, supervisory accountability under review. By evening, the notice was external. Passengers received emails inviting them to submit statements. A hotline was activated. A third-party auditor was named. The system, once tight-lipped, was now speaking, because it had been forced to listen. Ruth and Isaiah watched the news from a quiet hotel room overlooking the runway. Planes lifted into the dusk, one by one, lights blinking like punctuation marks against the darkening sky. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed, Bible open in her lap. Not for show, not for comfort alone, but for grounding. She read softly, her voice steady. "The Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love." Psalm 33:5. Isaiah nodded. "Justice doesn't feel loud," he said. "It feels solid." Their son sat nearby, scrolling through updates, jaw set, not with anger, but resolve. He looked up. "They're finding more," he said quietly. "Older complaints, settlements that were never public." Ruth closed the Bible gently. "That's why this matters." At airline headquarters, an emergency board session convened. No cameras, no press releases yet, just reckoning. One director cleared his throat. "This isn't about one employee." Caleb spoke then, measured, precise. "Correct. It's about what we tolerated because it was convenient." Another director asked, "What do you recommend?" Caleb didn't hesitate. Policy reform, mandatory dignity training tied to evaluations, transparent reporting, and a written apology, not just to my parents, but to every passenger who learned that silence was safer than truth. The room was still. Then the chair nodded. Agreed. The vote was unanimous. By nightfall, Heather was escorted from the airport. No crowd, no cameras, just a long walk past gates she once commanded. Her heels echoed too loudly now. No one looked at her. Mason left separately, shoulders slumped, badge surrendered, future uncertain. Gina's office light went dark. Back at the hotel, Ruth stood by the window watching another plane lift. She whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the quiet itself. "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." Luke 8:17. Isaiah stepped beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You all right?" She nodded. "I am now." Not because they'd won, but because the truth had. Down below, a final announcement echoed faintly across the terminal, a boarding call for another flight, another beginning. But this story was nearing its end. Privilege had collapsed, not with a crash, but with exposure. And dignity, patient, unyielding, stood where it always had, waiting to be recognized. Morning arrived without applause. Sunlight poured through the hotel window in a clean, forgiving way, as if the night had washed the world and left it honest. Ruth woke first. She lay still for a moment, listening, to the soft hum of traffic below, to Isaiah's steady breathing, to the quiet inside herself that felt unfamiliar after days of tension. Peace, she realized, is not the absence of memory. It is the absence of fear. Isaiah stirred and reached for her hand without opening his eyes. She squeezed back. They sat up together, slower than they used to, but steadier now. Two people who had endured something ugly without letting it teach them ugliness in return. They dressed simply. No press, no entourage, no need to prove anything. In the lobby, Caleb waited with coffee. Black for Isaiah, cream and sugar for Ruth, remembered without asking. He looked tired, but lighter, as if the burden he'd been carrying belonged to the system now, not to his family. "They finalized the changes," he said quietly as they walked toward the exit. "Training standards. A permanent policy against forced separation for elderly passengers. Independent reporting lines." Ruth nodded. "Good. And the apology," he added. "It's public." Isaiah stopped walking. "Public is fine," he said gently. "But truth is better." Caleb met his father's eyes. "It tells the truth." Outside, the airport breathed. Buses rolling, engines idling, travelers hurrying toward their own stories. The black SUV waited again, door open, patient. Ruth hesitated before getting in. She turned back toward the terminal, toward the gates and glass and memory. "Can we go inside for a moment?" she asked. Caleb searched her face, then nodded. "Of course." They walked back through the sliding doors, not to the airline counters, not to the lounges, but to a quiet corner near the windows where planes lined up like commas, pauses between destinations. Ruth stood there, hands folded, watching a family reunite. Laughter, hugs, relief spilling freely. Isaiah followed her gaze. "You okay?" "Yes," she said. "I just want to leave this place without bitterness." Caleb said nothing. He understood this was not his moment. Ruth closed her eyes and whispered, not for anyone else to hear, not as performance. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Psalm 51:10. Isaiah bowed his head. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting what had been done. It meant refusing to let the wound decide who they would become next. A woman approached hesitantly, mid-30s, business attire, eyes uncertain. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I was on your flight." Ruth turned, attentive. "Yes? I just wanted to say—" "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner," the woman said. "I thought it wasn't my place." Ruth studied her face, saw the fear there, the shame, the courage it took to return. She reached out and touched the woman's arm. "Next time," Ruth said gently, "use your voice when it shakes. It still counts." The woman nodded, tears brimming. "Thank you." When she walked away, Isaiah exhaled. "That matters." "It does," Ruth agreed. "More than consequences." They returned to the car and drove, past the runways, past the gates, toward a future that looked the same on the surface but felt different underneath. Weeks later, the story settled into record. The airline released a full report. Names were named, policies rewritten, training mandated, a fund established for passenger dignity and safety, overseen independently. Complaints once buried were re-examined, patterns acknowledged, and then, quietly, the news cycle moved on. Ruth and Isaiah returned home to their small house with the creaking porch and the maple tree that dropped leaves like reminders of time. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and awkward hugs. Church friends prayed without spectacle. Life resumed. One Sunday, Ruth stood at the lectern, not to speak about the flight, but to read scripture. Her voice carried calmly through the sanctuary. "He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" Micah 6:8. She closed the Bible and looked up. Not triumphant, not wounded, whole. Later that afternoon, Caleb sat at their kitchen table while Ruth brewed tea. "I keep thinking I should have done more," he said. "Sooner." Isaiah placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did what mattered when it mattered." Ruth set the cups down. "Power doesn't protect people because it exists," she said. "It protects people when it listens." Caleb nodded, absorbing that truth like a charge he intended to keep. That evening, Ruth and Isaiah walked the block as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that softened the world. They passed the park where children played and the bus stop where strangers waited together, patient, ordinary, human. Isaiah squeezed Ruth's hand. "You think it changed anything?" she considered. "It changed us," she said. "And it changed a system that thought we wouldn't be believed." They stopped at the corner and watched the light turn green. Somewhere, another flight boarded. Another crew prepared. Another passenger wondered if they belonged. And somewhere else, a policy existed because two people refused to surrender their dignity, even when it would have been easier to do so. Ruth lifted her eyes to the sky, where a plane crossed silently, small and steady. "The Lord will give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace." Psalm 29:11. She smiled, not because justice had been loud, but because it had been right. If this story moved you, it's because it's not just about a flight. It's about how power responds when dignity is tested. Justice doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives with records, witnesses, and the courage to endure without becoming cruel. The Bible reminds us that truth exposed is not truth destroyed. It is truth restored. And when we choose justice with humility, we don't just correct a wrong. We rebuild trust for the next person who walks through the same gate. If you've ever felt small in a place that tried to erase you, remember this. Your dignity is not assigned by a seat number, a a uniform, or a title. It is given by God, and no system can revoke it. If you believe stories like this matter, stories of quiet power, moral courage, and faith-rooted justice, like, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices. Share this story with someone who needs to remember they belong, because justice doesn't shout, it lands softly and changes everything.